So your groups are just named as A, B, C, D, E, F,
Yes.
and they don't have names as a car or...
No.
Okay.
No, because you can't always put... A lot of mixers like to say, well, I want all the horses on that... I want all the horse hooves on that bus A.
Yeah.
And I want all the bridles and the saddle and everything on bus D. And the carriages go on bus C. And they want that because they're not looking at the individual tracks, they've got 15 faders, and each fader is a bus. And so they say, okay, that's my horse whinnies and vocals, and that's my horse hooves, and that's the carriage. And you can't always, especially on something like this, you haven't got enough space to be able to lay up everything only on one bus.
So you would have 10 times more tracks
than
now.
Yeah, and I mean what we do is we try to do that on a scene by scene. So, for example, in this sequence, all the underwater moves are on the same bus. But in a previous scene, that bus might have had something else in there that isn't water moves, it might be a similar frequency. So we've got water going in here on this bus. Let's just play it and see. We've got water for the... So that's just those 3 stereo tracks. And if we look at what the level of what automation's doing, it's very low and then it rides up. And you can see that there's a little push in it, you can hear that. There's also a tiny little push in the VCA as well. At some point it was all brought down. But the blue line is the trim automation previous, and the yellow line is the trim automation current. So there's a lot of information there to make use of. But then later on, when we come to go underwater,
and most of the time you got no plugins. You had no plugins on the bus channel. For example, a high cut filter or something else.
No, let's have a look. Let's have a look. Let's see what we've got going on here. No, it doesn't look like it. I don't know if we've got anything. I don't know how much of this. At one point we would have done, and then we may have recorded it.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's fully automated on this. I'll span that. 2 spanners. Yeah, looks like there's no automation going or sending going. But there would be at some point. We would have on the bus, we'd have a high pass and a low pass. And there might be some here, for example. Yeah, you can see there's a bit of, on this water here, it's shooting down, there's a bit of high pass taken off. What you hear is what we take to the cutting room, is what we take to the dummy theatre from the cutting room. And really what the mixer does there is more about what happens on the bus with the sends and the reverbs. And a lot of the automation that's done on the channels, the individual, I can't find some, but all the editors use this plugin a lot all the time now. Because it pretty much replicates what's happening on the stage in terms of dynamics and filtering. The one thing that we try to avoid doing is when we're in the cutting room, we try and avoid using compression, because the headroom that we have in our system, in our cutting room, is limited to what we can monitor. But the headroom in a dubbing stage on a big mixing theatre is much higher. So if we add in compression because we're not getting the right sounds to work in conjunction with each other, we will get to the stage and he'll say, take the compression off, we don't need it to compress this. But so what we then do to avoid that is where we have very specific impact sounds, or sounds that we worry about, you know, like we played with the parachutes. That's why the parachute opening air was on one bus, and the punch for the fabric snapping tight is on another bus. And then it means that without having to worry about compressing that, we can have those two separate and we can make that louder or quieter. But if they were in the same bus, as you'd expect it to be, you'd say, well, that's the parachute, we'll put it in one bus. To make it work properly, we'd have to compress the sound so that the punch really cut through. So we try and avoid compression in the cutting room. And it's interesting with the new digital sound and the way that we're now working with DCP. The end result of our process would be to make what's called a print master. So that would go onto an optical track on film. And there would be 3 to 4 to 5 different versions on the side of each print. And you'd have to make those different versions. So you'd spend a day or two print mastering, making sure that it's ready. Now, you make a DCP, and it's done in almost running time, and it's gone, and that's it. And it's there's no, you can QC it once, it's fine, it's done. You're only doing one version, and that's the version for everybody now. And we've had instances where we were previewing in, I don't know, somewhere in the States, I can't remember where it was, somewhere in California. We previewed, the director had it, before the preview to the audience, they did a tech check and they ran it in the stage to make sure it sounded fine. And the director said, why is that music in there? We told them, that I thought we understood we weren't going to have that music cue in there. So the post supervisor, a guy called Ben Rosenblatt, sat on the stage with his laptop and he rebuilt the DCP there and then in the cinema, so it was ready for the 2 hours later when they were going to show it to the audience. So you think, oh my God, that process alone would have taken 2 or 3 days. Now you can do it in an hour and a half an hour before the screening. So I've had instances where we've previewed, or where we final mixed, the film has been premiered, and the director sits in the premiere and goes, I think we got it wrong. I think now he's heard it with an audience and it's a big deal. He's come back and he said, we've got 3 days before release. Can we just go back and remix this and that? And you can. So you can now, you know, the whole process of it is still open until the very last minute. And even then, there are, and it happened with this film. There were visual effects. No, was it this film? Bond. It happened with James Bond. There were 36 visual effects outstanding that were still not in the film 2 weeks after its release. But all they had to do is send out the file, the MXF file and the picture file and everything else, to every cinema, and the next time they played it, it had all the new visual effects in. It didn't have to go through a lab process or a DCP process. Because it all just, well, I suppose it does go through a DCP process, but it just replaces the files with the new files. So it's sourcing those files instead. And you think, well, there's no reason why a director can't watch a film, or a film gets opened in America and it doesn't do very well, and the critics are saying that the ending was ridiculous, nobody would believe a story like that, and the director goes, okay, let's change the ending. So then by the time it releases in China, it's got a different ending. It's the way filmmaking is going, is they can constantly change it. If there's enough money, they're going to lose that much money on it, then they'll change it. Which means that it's more work for us, which is great. But it means that the picture has finally got caught up with sound, because sound has always been more volatile and more variable. I mean, I got into sound because I was cutting picture on 35mm, and all the soundtracks were being done on computers, and I was like, wow, we're working with stone and they're working with mercury, and it's like, that's so much more exciting than just editing, you know, chunks of stock and celluloid. So I pitched everything into sound. That's it. I want to play with that because that's so much more fun, and that's all versatile, and you can change it. And you can have fun with it. it's like playing with mercury. And then eventually, you know, Avid came up with the picture editing and on that, and so the picture followed suit with sound, and it's the same again. It's the idea that picture can now be open right up until the very last, and even past the very last into the next stage. And sound has always been that thing. It's always been the last thing to lock because it's mercurial.
So at the end, the soundstage delivers a discrete 5.1 file for making the DCP, right?
Now it's changed. Now the sound. Now initially it was 5.1. Now it's 7.1 and 5.1 and 9.1, and for IMAX Immersive it's 12.1. And for, I think Atmos is 9.1 and objects. So you have 5 or 6 different deliverables. And I think on most DCPs now, that if you've got an Atmos DCP, then you deliver the 9.1, the object mix, the 7.1 and the 5.1, and they all exist on the DCP. Which just means the back end of the process is much longer. It's making the 9.1 is easy, making the 5.1 is easy, as long as you make the 7.1 to start with. So that's why we're all working in 7.1, because you can derive more delivery options from that than you can from a 5.1. It's very hard to make a 7.1 from a 5.1. It's not very user friendly, but it's very easy to make a 5.1 mix down. And Atmos is different again. I don't know if Atmos will last. I don't know if people will pay. People don't pay to go and watch an Atmos film in the way that they pay to go and watch a 3D film. People are still led very much by their visual entertainment. But those that like Atmos would pay to go and see an Atmos film. Those that like sound, those that understand it's a sound-based film, like Star Wars, for example, they'd go and watch an Atmos rather than... One of the things to remember about all these different formats is that we still have mono as our premium prime. Everything has to have that mono signal, and it's quite an interesting format. I work with directors where we talk about the intensity of a film and the claustrophobia of a film, and so what we do is we mix it in mono, and then we might say, well look, let's, at this point here, we cut from, we're inside the car, we've been in the car for 15 minutes and it's got more and more uncomfortable, and then we cut to a wide shot. Let's go into full surround, atmosphere, birds, everything else, and that effect that it has on the audience is incredibly subtle but really profound. Suddenly the room that they've been in, which has just been, everything's just been there, it's like somebody's taken the walls away, and the cinema is now full of sound, and I think that that's not used often enough. I think even if you were just to have your dialogues and your music and effects, and then a bit of reverb coming in but not too much, and then really push out into the room and use the full dynamics as an effect itself. So you're sort of saying, we don't need to have it on all the time. If you have it on all the time, it loses its impact. Like we're talking about having silence, it's the most important sound in your soundscape is silence. You need to have those. You need to be brave. It's like when we cut from the water back to him breaking it, going through the corridor. It's almost silent by comparison. And you need that contrast. Otherwise, there's no yin and yang. You've got to have the extremes. And in the same way, you've got to use the physical space that we're given to push that air. If you want somebody to be thrown into space and they've been in a capsule, you do everything in mono, and then you open it into a huge Atmos, spatial thing. And that's when it's like, wow, this is incredible. I feel like I'm there. It's genuinely impressive. We don't get, filmmakers get the luxury of using that space. That's why sound is such a great medium in film, but in TV and smaller projects you can still do that by using very simple, going mono for as much as you can, and then using the width, the left and the right,